Libby Squire was raped and murdered by a serial sex offender. Her killer was Pawel Relowicz, who'd been preying on students near the University of Hull for 18 months. His offending was so brazen, the police were able to find him on CCTV performing a sex act in the road.
It is the night of January 31st, 2019, Kingston upon Hull, England. The grainy lens of a security camera at the Welly Club in Hull captures 21-year-old Libby Squire being turned away. It is a freezing Thursday night. To the doorman, she is just another student who has had too much to drink, a liability he doesn't want inside. He has no way of knowing that by refusing her entry, he is pushing her out of a world of security and light and into the path of a predator who has been circling the block for hours. Libby is disoriented. She is shivering. The temperature is plummeting toward zero, and a light dusting of snow is beginning to settle on the pavement. Her friends, worried but helpless, pay for a taxi to take her home. They watch the car pull away, believing the danger is over. But minutes later, for reasons we will never fully understand, Libby gets out of that taxi. She doesn't walk into her house. She wanders back toward the main road, a dark figure against the white snow. And in the shadows of the street, a silver Vauxhall Astra slows down. When we think of monsters, we think of strangers in masks or figures in the woods. But the reality of the Libby Squire case is far more terrifying. The man who was watching her wasn't a stranger to the city. He was a father. He was a husband. He was a local butcher. To the people who lived on his street, Pawel Relowicz was invisible, a normal man living a normal life. But the truth was hidden in his archives. Hundreds of pairs of stolen underwear and stolen sex toys, photos taken through bedroom windows, and a history of prowling that had been escalating for 2 years. This is a case that shocked the United Kingdom, not just because of the brutality of the murder, but because of the digital trail that exposed a serial predator hiding in plain sight. It is a story of how a peeping Tom became a killer, and how a city's own security cameras became the primary witnesses to a crime that almost remained a secret. I'm Detective Tom. This is a channel where we don't sugarcoat the story. We don't skip the hard parts. We give you the facts, the evidence, and the reality of what happened. If you believe victims deserve to have their stories told, if you want to understand how these cases really work, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on those notifications. Before we proceed, please be aware, the following video documents a real-life murder investigation. It contains disturbing descriptions of graphic violence that some viewers may find deeply unsettling. This channel does not condone or encourage violence. This content is produced strictly for educational and documentary purposes. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Let's look at the footage again. It's 11:45 p.m. Libby has reached a wooden bench on Beverly Road. She is sitting there, hunched over, crying. She is vulnerable in a way that is painful to watch. She is a philosophy student, a daughter, a sister, but in this moment, in this city, she is alone. Now, look at the background. A silver car passes. It doesn't stop, not yet. It circles. This is Pawel Relowicz. For 3 hours, he has been hunting. He has been seen on multiple cameras throughout the student district, driving in loops, his eyes scanning the sidewalks. He isn't looking for a shortcut home. He is looking for a target that cannot fight back. When he sees Libby on that bench, he doesn't see a human being in need of help. He sees an opportunity. He parks his car on a side street and begins to walk. He effectively stalks her, crossing the road to stay out of her line of sight, waiting for the other cars to pass. He is biding his time. He is waiting for the street to be empty of witnesses. At 12:08 a.m., the final image of Libby Squire alive is captured. She is standing near the passenger door of the silver Astra. We see Relowicz on the other side. There is no struggle caught on camera, only the closing of a door and the car pulling away. To the rest of the world, Libby had simply vanished. But for Relowicz, the hunt was over and the violence was about to begin. By the next morning, the city of Hull was transformed. The university campus was plastered with photos of Libby's smiling face. Hundreds of students joined the search, walking through the snow and peering into gardens. Police divers entered the River Hull, disappearing beneath the gray, freezing water. For 7 weeks, the UK was gripped by a single question: where is Libby? While the search was underway, Pawel Relowicz went back to work at the butcher shop. He went home to his wife and children. He acted as if nothing had happened, but the digital breadcrumbs he left behind were already being gathered. Detectives were painstakingly harvesting thousands of hours of CCTV, tracking every silver Vauxhall Astra in the city. The unknown truth was that Libby was no longer in the city. She had been taken to a dark, isolated park called Oak Road Playing Fields. There, in the dead of night, she had been raped and murdered. Relowicz had then carried her body to the riverbank and discarded her into the freezing current, believing the Humber Estuary would wash away his sins. He was wrong. 7 weeks later, a fishing boat 30 miles away spotted a figure in the water. Libby was found, and with her recovery, the focus shifted from a missing person search to a homicide investigation that would peel back the layers of Relowitz's double life. To understand the magnitude of what was lost on that freezing night in Hull, we must step away from the grainy CCTV and the cold police reports. We have to look at the personality of the person who lived behind the headlines. Libby Squire was not just a missing student. She was not a victim of a night out gone wrong. She was a vibrant, deeply loved young woman who was just beginning to grasp the reins of her own future. Libby was 21 years old. She was a philosophy student at the University of Hull, a choice of study that spoke volumes about her character. Philosophy isn't a degree for those looking for easy answers. It's for the curious, the thinkers, and those who want to understand the fundamental nature of existence. This was Libby. Her mother, Libby Squire, describes her as a big personality with an even bigger heart. She was a girl who loved her family, her friends, and her life in the city she had come to call home. Libby grew up in High Wycombe, a market town in Buckinghamshire. She was the eldest of 4 siblings, the leader of the pack. In her family home, she was the one who brought the noise, the laughter, and the energy. She was a nurturer by nature, always looking out for her younger siblings, ensuring they felt safe and loved. When she moved to Hull for university, she brought that same nurturing spirit to her friend group. She was the one who would listen for hours to a friend's problems, the one who would organize the group chats, the one who made sure everyone felt included. But there was another side to Libby, one that makes her disappearance even more poignant. Libby was open about her struggles with mental health. She dealt with periods of depression and an eating disorder, but she didn't let those things define her. Instead, she fought through them with a transparency that inspired those around her. She was a girl who understood that life was messy and difficult, and she was determined to find the beauty in it anyway. Her bravery in facing her own shadows is perhaps why she was so well equipped to study philosophy. She wasn't afraid to ask the hard questions about life and suffering. In January 2019, Libby was in her 2nd year. She was thriving. She had a close-knit group of friends who were more like family. She loved the student life in Hull, the cheap drinks at the Welly, the late-night walks, the feeling of independence. To Libby, Hull felt like a safe place. It was a city of students, a place where you could walk down the street at night and feel like you were part of a community. She had no reason to believe that a monster was hiding in the shadows of the very streets she walked every day. Let's look at the night of January 31st through the lens of that humanity. It started as an ordinary Thursday. For a student, a Thursday night out is a ritual. It's a chance to let off steam before the weekend. Libby was excited. She had spent the evening pre-drinking with her friends at her house on Wellesley Avenue. They were listening to music, doing their makeup, taking photos, the kind of moments that fill every student's camera roll. By the time they reached the Welly Club at 11:20 p.m., Libby was happy. She was in high spirits. But, as we know, she was also intoxicated. In the student world, being too drunk is often treated as a joke or a rite of passage. But on this night, it became a death sentence. When the doormen turned her away, Libby didn't argue. She wasn't aggressive. She was just a girl who had reached her limit. When her friends put her in that taxi, they did it out of love. They wanted her to be warm. They wanted her to be in her own bed. They paid the driver, gave him her address, and watched the car pull away. It is a moment that haunts them to this day, the guilt of watching a friend drive toward a fate they couldn't have imagined. Libby got out of the taxi just a few hundred yards from her front door. Why? We will never truly know. Perhaps she realized she didn't have her keys and didn't want to wake her housemates. Perhaps she felt the need for fresh air. Regardless of the reason, the Libby who stepped onto the pavement was a girl who was physically and mentally compromised by the freezing cold and the alcohol. When you are in that state, your world narrows. You aren't thinking about predators or shadow lives. You are thinking about the cold. You are thinking about how tired you are. By the time Libby reached the bench on Beverly Road, she was crying. She was sitting in the snow, a 21-year-old philosophy student who was, for the first time in her life, truly alone and truly lost. This is the point where we must talk about the prowler. While Libby was a girl defined by her heart and her intellect, Pawel Relowicz was a man defined by his perversions. For months, Libby had been living her life, studying, laughing, dreaming, while just a few streets away, Relowicz had been building a secret file of his own. He had been practicing for this night. He had been lurking in the gardens of student houses, watching women through their bedroom windows, stealing their underwear, and satisfying his own dark urges. To Relowicz, Libby wasn't a philosophy student. She wasn't a sister or a daughter. She was an opportunity. He saw her on that bench, crying and vulnerable, and he didn't see a person in need of help. He saw a target that wouldn't be able to fight back. The tragedy of the Libby Squire case is the collision of these two worlds. The world of a young woman who believed in the goodness of people and the beauty of life, and the world of a man who saw the world as a hunting ground. As Libby sat on that bench at 11:45 p.m., she was still Libby. She was still the girl who loved her high-waisted skirts, the girl who would stay up late talking about the meaning of life, the girl who was the princess of her family. She was just 21. She had 50 years of life left to live. She had degrees to finish, careers to start, and a family of her own to build. But as the silver Astra pulled up alongside her, all of that potential began to evaporate. The humanity of the situation was replaced by the brutality of a predator's intent. To truly grasp the motive behind the murder of Libby Squire, we must look away from the light of Libby's life and stare directly into the darkness of the man who ended it. In the public eye, Pawel Relowicz was a ghost, a non-entity. He was a 24-year-old Polish national living in Hull, a husband, a father of 2 young children, and a hard-working butcher. To his neighbors on Raglan Street, he was just another face in the crowd, a man who went to work, came home, and kept his head down. But behind that mask of boring domesticity, Relowicz was building a secret file of perversion that had been escalating for years. In the world of crime and behavioral statistics, we often talk about escalation. Predators rarely start with murder. They begin with smaller, low-level transgressions that provide them with a thrill, a sense of power, and a way to test the boundaries of the law. Pawel Relowicz was a textbook example of this dangerous progression. While Libby was attending lectures and dreaming of her future, Relowicz was spending his nights prowling. This wasn't a one-time impulse. It was a lifestyle. He was a serial sexual voyeur and a fetishistic burglar. Between 2017 and the night he met Libby in 2019, Relowicz had turned the student areas of Hull into his personal hunting grounds. He didn't look for money or electronics when he broke into houses. He looked for intimacy. The police files, once opened, revealed a stomach-churning history. Relowicz had a calling card. He would break into student homes, places where young women felt safe, and steal their most private belongings. He targeted underwear, sex toys, and photographs. In one instance, a student woke up to find a man standing in her bedroom, watching her sleep. In another, he was caught on CCTV masturbating outside a window while watching a woman inside. He was a peeping Tom who had lost all sense of shame, fueled by a deep-seated need to dominate and degrade women from the safety of the shadows. But here's where the systematic failure of the story begins. Despite his frequent prowling, Relowicz had no criminal record in the UK. He was a clean skin. Every time he masturbated in a public park or stood outside a window, he was taking a gamble with the law. And every time he wasn't caught, his confidence grew. To a predator like Relowicz, a lack of consequences is seen as a green light. He began to believe he was invisible. He began to believe he was smarter than the system. By the night of January 31st, 2019, the prowler was bored with just watching. He wanted contact. Let's look at the statistics of his behavior that night. For 3 hours before he encountered Libby, Relowicz was driving his silver Vauxhall Astra in circles. This wasn't a random drive. He was hunting. He was seen on CCTV multiple times in the student quarters, his eyes scanning the sidewalks for a woman alone. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for vulnerability. He was looking for someone who couldn't run, someone who wouldn't be missed immediately, someone like Libby. When he saw Libby sitting on that bench on Beverly Road at 11:45 p.m., he didn't see a human being in distress. He didn't see a girl who was shivering in the snow, crying for help. He saw a gift. In his warped mind, Libby was the ultimate prize for a man who had spent years stealing underwear from empty houses. She was real, she was there, and she was incapacitated. The truth of Pawel Relowicz is that he was a man of two faces. At his trial, his defense tried to paint him as a good Samaritan who saw a drunk girl and wanted to make sure she got home safe. They pointed to his life as a father and a butcher as proof that he wasn't a monster. But the prosecution stripped that mask away. They showed that after he took Libby to the Oak Road playing fields, a dark, secluded area miles from her home, he didn't call an ambulance. He didn't drop her at a police station. Instead, he raped her and killed her, then dumped her body into the freezing River Hull like she was nothing more than the scraps he handled at the butcher shop. After the murder, Relowicz's behavior was even more chilling. He didn't flee. He didn't panic. He went home to his wife. He cleaned his car. He went back to work. When the police eventually knocked on his door a week later, they found a man who was eerily calm. During his interviews, he would sometimes smile.
You are under arrest for the murder and rape of Libby Squire.
He would play word games with the detectives. He seemed to enjoy the attention, the cat-and-mouse game of the investigation. He was a man who felt no empathy for the girl he had discarded. His only concern was trying to keep his crime covered. This is the reality of the invisible predator. They don't always look like the monsters we see in movies. Sometimes they look like the man who cuts your meat, or the father playing with his kids at the park. Relowicz's shadow life was hidden behind a veneer of normalcy that he used as a shield. He relied on the fact that society tends to look away from low-level sexual deviancy. We call it creepy or weird, but we often don't call the police until it's too late. These acts of Pawel Relowicz are a warning. They tell us that predators don't stay in the shadows forever. They escalate. They move from watching to touching, from stealing to taking. If the low-level crimes he committed in the 2 years leading up to Libby's murder had been taken more seriously, if his DNA had been captured after he was spotted masturbating in public, Libby Squire might still be alive today. The investigation into the disappearance of Libby Squire began as a frantic search for a missing person, but it quickly evolved into one of the most complex forensic puzzles in the history of the Humberside police. When a person vanishes into a freezing night without a trace, investigators are forced to rely on the invisible trail left behind, the digital echoes of a life, and the mechanical movements of a predator. To find Libby, the police had to reconstruct a timeline second by second, stitching together urban surveillance that spanned the entire city of Hull. The search started at the last place Libby was seen, the bench on Beverly Road. Detectives began the grueling task of harvesting CCTV. They didn't just look at the cameras on the main road. They went door to door, collecting footage from private doorbells, gas stations, and local businesses. This was a massive undertaking. Thousands of hours of grainy, flickering video had to be watched by officers in dark rooms, looking for a single frame that didn't belong. Very quickly, a pattern emerged. A silver Vauxhall Astra was seen circling the student area with an almost mechanical persistence. It passed Libby while she was walking. It passed the bench where she sat crying. And eventually it pulled up alongside her. The license plate was tracked. The car belonged to Pawel Relowicz. When the police first brought Relowicz in for questioning, he was not a murder suspect. He was a witness. He sat in the interview room and spun a story of a good Samaritan. He told the detectives that he saw a girl in distress and simply wanted to help. He claimed he drove her a short distance. She felt better, and he dropped her off near her home. It was a plausible story, delivered with a calm, helpful demeanor. But forensics do not care about stories. They care about data. Detectives began to cross-reference Relowitz's story with the movement of his car. If he had dropped Libby off where he said he did, his car should have been seen on cameras heading back toward his home on Raglan Street within minutes. But it wasn't. Instead, his Astra was captured on a silent camera moving toward Oak Road playing fields, a desolate, unlit park bordered by the River Hull. The car entered the park at 12:11 a.m. It didn't leave until 12:19 a.m. 8 minutes. That was the window of time that investigators focused on. What happens in 8 minutes? In the world of forensics, 8 minutes is an eternity. It is enough time for a struggle, for a crime, and for a body to be discarded. While the digital team was tracking the car, the physical search for Libby reached a level of intensity that the city had never seen. Hundreds of officers, volunteers, and even regional underwater search units descended on Hull. They searched the park, the playing fields, and the dense woodland. They used sonar, drones, and heat-seeking cameras. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence grew heavier. The ground was frozen, making it difficult for dogs to pick up a scent, and the river was high and fast-moving due to recent winter storms. On March 20th, 2019, 7 weeks after Libby vanished, the search came to a grim end. A fishing boat in the Humber Estuary, nearly 30 miles away from the Oak Road playing fields, spotted something in the water. It was Libby. The recovery of her body changed the nature of the case instantly. Now, the pathologists and forensic scientists took center stage. The estuary is a brutal environment. The tides are among the strongest in the world. Being in the water for 7 weeks is devastating to physical evidence. However, the cold temperature of the water had acted as a natural preservative for certain key details. Pathologists found no obvious signs of a fatal blow or a stabbing. The cause of death was officially undetermined, but the circumstances were clear. Forensic experts in hydrology and tidal patterns were brought in to work backward from where she was found. By calculating the speed of the current and the tidal shifts over those 7 weeks, they were able to prove with mathematical certainty that her body had entered the water at the exact point where Relowitz's car had been parked, the Oak Road playing fields. But the most damning piece of forensic evidence wasn't the car or the currents. It was something small, something intimate. When Libby's body was recovered, she was still wearing a gold necklace and a watch. Forensic technicians examined these items under high-powered microscopes. On the clasp of the watch and the fabric of her clothing, they found what they were looking for: DNA. It wasn't just Libby's DNA. It was a match for Pawel Relowicz. Relowicz had claimed he barely touched her, that he had only helped her into the car, but the DNA was found in places and in quantities that suggested a violent, sexual struggle. The science was beginning to strip away his Good Samaritan mask. The investigation then turned to Relowicz's own home. When police searched his house and his car, they found the true extent of his secret life. They found a trophy room of stolen items, hundreds of pairs of women's underwear, photographs, sex toys, and personal items taken from student houses over the previous 2 years. This was the predator's archive. It proved that his encounter with Libby wasn't a random act of kindness gone wrong. It was the culmination of a long-term, escalating pattern of sexual deviancy. One of the most chilling forensic discoveries was found on his phone. In the hours after Libby went missing, while her friends were out in the cold searching for her, Relowicz was searching the internet. He wasn't looking for news about a missing girl. He was looking at pornography, specifically videos that mirrored the struggle and the environment of the crime he had just committed. This digital footprint provided the malice that the prosecution needed. It showed a man who was not in shock or mourning, but a man who was fueled by the violence he had inflicted. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, the timeline became an airtight cage. 11:45 p.m., Libby sits on the bench. 12:01 a.m., Relowicz stalks her. 12:08 a.m., Libby enters the car. 12:11 a.m., the car enters the dark park. 12:19 a.m., the car leaves the park. In those 8 minutes at Oak Road, the life of a philosophy student was ended, and a butcher's secret life was finally caught in the glare of the forensic lights. Relowicz had thought the darkness of the park and the depth of the river would hide his actions. He hadn't counted on the persistence of the digital trail, or the fact that even the strongest tides eventually give up their secrets. The evidence was no longer just a collection of grainy videos and DNA swabs. It was a narrative of a predator who had been allowed to prowl for too long. The trial of Pawel Relowicz began in early 2021 at Sheffield Crown Court, a setting that felt far removed from the snowy streets of Hull, but carried the full weight of the nation's attention. Relowicz stood in the dock, no longer the invisible neighbor, but a man forced to account for every minute of that freezing January night. The prosecution's case was built on the undeniable logic of the timeline we've explored: the car, the DNA, and the predator's habits. But it was Relowicz's own testimony that revealed the true nature of his character. Taking the stand, Relowicz maintained his Good Samaritan defense, but under cross-examination, his story began to fracture. He was forced to admit to his history of voyeurism and prowling. He sat calmly as the court heard about the hundreds of items of stolen underwear found in his home. His defense argued that being a pervert did not make him a murderer. They suggested that Libby, in her confused and intoxicated state, might have simply fallen into the river after he left her. However, the prosecution pointed to a critical detail. Libby's DNA was found on the passenger seat and the floor of his car, but also deep within his own DNA profiles collected from the scene. The science suggested a level of contact that went far beyond helping someone into a vehicle. Furthermore, the jury was asked a simple, haunting question. Why would a man who spent his nights stalking women suddenly decide to become a savior for the most vulnerable girl he had ever encountered? On February 11, 2021, the jury returned their verdict. They found Pawel Relowicz guilty of the rape and murder of Libby Squire. The courtroom was silent as the judge, Justice Lambert, addressed the killer. She described his actions as vile and depraved, noting that he had taken advantage of Libby's vulnerability in the most malignant way possible. Relowicz was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years. At 26 years old, he was told he would likely be an old man before he ever saw the outside of a prison cell again. But for Libby's family, the verdict was not the end. It was the beginning of a new, difficult chapter. Libby's mother, Libby Squire, has since become a powerful voice for change in the UK. She refused to let her daughter's death be just another statistic. Lisa began a relentless campaign to change how the police and society handle non-contact sexual offenses. She argued that if Relowicz's early crimes, the public masturbation, the voyeurism, the prowling, had been treated as the serious warning signs they were, Libby might still be alive. Lisa's mission has led to meetings with the highest levels of the UK government and the Home Office. Her goal is simple but profound: to ensure that when a woman reports a creeper or a peeping Tom, the system doesn't just shrug it off. She wants mandatory DNA collection for these offenders and better training for officers to recognize the escalation patterns of predators. Because of Libby, the conversation around women's safety in university cities has shifted from what she was wearing or how much she drank to how do we stop the men who are hunting. Libby Squire should be alive today. She should have graduated with her philosophy degree. She should have pursued whatever dreams she had for her future. She should have grown old, fallen in love, built a career, made a difference in the world. Instead, she became a victim, a case file, a statistic. But through her mother's tireless advocacy, through the systemic changes being implemented in her name, Libby's legacy is saving lives. Other women are safer because of the reforms Lisa Squire has fought for. Other predators are being caught earlier in their offending cycle before they can escalate to murder. The legacy of Libby Squire is one of courage. It is found in the students who now look out for one another more closely on nights out. It is found in the way her family speaks about her, not as a victim, but as the vibrant, philosophy-loving girl who forced a nation to look at the dangers lurking in its streets. Libby Squire was 21. She was a thinker, a sister, and a friend. She was loved, and in the end, it was that love and the relentless pursuit of the facts that ensured the man who tried to erase her was the one who was finally removed from society. To everyone who has watched, listened, and engaged with this case, thank you for giving Libby Squire the respect she deserves. Thank you for understanding that true crime isn't entertainment. It's education about how evil operates and how justice can prevail. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a case breakdown. Leave a comment letting me know what case you want me to cover next. This is Detective Tom reminding you, the truth matters, victims matter, and justice, no matter how long it takes, will always matter.